Do you think you know the people around you well? Do you think you can trust them blindly? Lily James did too. She trusted a coworker, someone she had spent time with. But that trust cost her life in a brutal way. She was bludgeoned to death with a hammer by someone who seemed harmless. Moments of terror that could have been avoided. Maybe you have someone close who raises doubts, but you end up ignoring the signs. The pain of losing someone, or even finding yourself in danger for not paying attention to the silent warnings, is something no one should go through. Today, I'm going to show you how to identify those signs, how to protect your life and the lives of those you love. Be careful with your company. Before we move on, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. In the upcoming videos, I'll bring more true crime stories, many of which involve women who, like Lily, trusted the wrong people. These contents will help you reflect on real situations that could happen in your daily life and teach you how to identify danger signs before it's too late. So, subscribe now and don't miss these essential alerts. The beginning of the mystery. It all started in a seemingly ordinary way, almost like an everyday scene that could go unnoticed by anyone. A surveillance camera installed on a quiet street in Sydney captured the footage. It was around 7 p.m. when a grey car entered the area recorded by the camera. The vehicle was moving slowly, without haste, and then disappeared around a corner. Up to this point, nothing unusual, right? Just another car driving through the city. Nothing unusual here, but in the next scenes, we'll see details with many clues that I doubt you'll notice unless you knew how to identify a psychopath in your daily life. And that's a warning sign because it could be any one of us in that situation. For this, I'm leaving a book for you to grab in the pinned comment called How to Identify a Potential Psychopath in Your Daily Life. Signs You Should Never Ignore. It's in the pinned comment, just click and access it. Protect yourself and your loved ones. Back to the case. A few minutes later, the same camera caught something a bit more peculiar. A man appeared in the footage. He was walking calmly down the sidewalk, hands in pockets, as if he were enjoying the onset of the evening, perhaps returning home after a long day at work. His walk was relaxed, unhurried, unflustered. He seemed just like another person among many. But shortly after passing by the camera, something changed. He turned around. This detail caught the investigator's attention, but not immediately. The man, who had initially been walking east, was now retracing his steps. What could have been just a wrong turn or a change of mind was, in fact, one of the first signs of something much more sinister. At that moment, he wasn't just walking, he was in the process of executing a plan. The man had stepped away for a simple yet macabre task, to dispose of the murder weapon. No one on that quiet street could imagine what had happened just minutes before. The serenity of his steps was almost chilling because behind that apparent calm was a cold-blooded killer who had just committed a brutal act. He showed no urgency, and perhaps that was what made the scene so unsettling. After discarding the weapon, he returned the same way, intending to do something even worse, ensure that no trace of his crime remained. His behavior, which could go unnoticed by anyone watching that footage out of context, was, in fact, the key to one of the most brutal crimes Sydney had witnessed in recent times. But the police would only discover this later when Lily James's body was found and the pieces of this puzzle began to fit together. What started as a simple surveillance recording would soon turn into the first clue of a chilling investigation. That was the beginning of the mystery, a mystery that was still far from being fully revealed, but whose first clues were already in sight. A grey car, a man walking, and a horrible crime about to be uncovered. The sinister call. At 11:50 p.m. that night, the silence was broken by a call that would put operators at the Australian emergency number, 000, on alert. The voice on the other end was male, but there was something strange. Hesitant, the caller spoke in a shaky manner, as if he were nervous or in shock. In the first words, it was hard to understand what he was saying. Long pauses, fragmented sentences, almost as if he were trying to control what he felt at that moment. "There's a body in the bathroom of St. Andrew's Cathedral School." The words were spaced, as if the man were struggling to form the complete sentence. The information was given in a fragmented manner but clear enough to put the operator on alert. A body? In one of the most prestigious schools in Sydney? That wasn't something common, and immediately the operator felt a knot in his stomach. Who was this man? Why did he seem so nervous? What did he have to do with that body? Would you be able to notice the clues before a mystery like this was unraveled? The truth is that without knowing how to identify the subtle behaviors of a psychopath in daily life, many of these clues can slip away. And that's a warning because any one of us could find ourselves in the same situation without realizing the signs. That's why I've made available a book called How to Identify a Potential Psychopath in Your Daily Life. Signs You Should Never Ignore in the pinned comment. Just click and access it. Protecting yourself and your loved ones starts with the right information. Back to the investigation. What seemed like just another surveillance recording would soon become the key piece of a terrifying mystery. Before the operator could ask any more questions, the call was abruptly cut off. Disconnected. No further explanation, no name, no details. Just a cold statement. There was a body of a woman in the bathroom of a school, and it had apparently been there for hours. Now imagine for a moment, you're sitting in an emergency center, receiving hundreds of calls each night, and suddenly you get a message like that. Could it be a prank? Someone trying to pull a fast one? Unfortunately, pranks weren't uncommon, but this call felt different. The tension in the man's voice, the abrupt way the call ended, everything indicated that this was serious. And if it were true, time was running out for them. The operator, without hesitation, alerted the police. It was better not to take any chances. In situations like this, every second could be crucial. The emergency protocol was activated, and soon a team was dispatched to check what was happening at St. Andrew's Cathedral School. The school, known for its impeccable facilities and century-old history, was hardly associated with any kind of crime. A tranquil place where families paid fortunes to ensure the best education for their children. What could be happening in such a place? The idea that something terrible was hidden inside was almost inconceivable. But the police knew they couldn't ignore that call. The patrol was quickly sent to the scene as the mystery began to unfold. Who was the man who made the call? Why did he seem so disturbed? And, more importantly, what did he know about the body that was supposedly in the school's bathroom? It was just the beginning of an investigation that would reveal much more than anyone could imagine that night. That call, so brief and enigmatic, would mark the start of one of the most shocking cases Sydney would ever witness. And the police team heading to St. Andrews had no idea they were about to face a horror scene that no one there would ever forget. The discovery of the body. When the police arrived at St. Andrew's Cathedral School, the clock was nearly midnight. The atmosphere was heavy, and the school, which was normally synonymous with prestige and tranquility, now seemed enveloped in an uncomfortable silence. The patrol car lights reflected off the dark windows, creating long shadows in the empty hallways. Only the echo of the officers' footsteps broke the stillness. As they approached the entrance, they were met by the school security guard, who, visibly shaken, didn't know exactly what was happening. The officers showed their badges and quickly explained that they were there because of a call received at 000. The guard frowned, confused, but readily cooperated, leading them to the mentioned location, the gym bathrooms. Each step they took down the hallways seemed to increase the tension. The feeling that something was profoundly wrong intensified as they neared the bathroom. The air felt denser, as if the very environment knew that something terrible was about to be revealed. Upon arrival, the police carefully opened the bathroom door. And it was at that moment that the reality of what they had been called to investigate hit them with full force. The body of a young woman lay next to one of the stalls, in a position indicating that she had been taken by surprise and attacked with no chance of defense. Her blonde hair was stained with blood that had already begun to dry on the white-tiled floor. The scene was macabre. The first thing that caught their attention was the state of her face. Several visible cranial traumas, the result of intense and repeated blows. The brutality of the attack was evident. The young woman's head had been beaten with such force that her features were practically unrecognizable. The floor around her was covered in blood, and each stain told the story of an unrelenting assault. Even the most experienced officers, those who had witnessed scenes of brutal crimes before, were impacted by what they saw. It wasn't just the fact that a young woman had been murdered. It was the level of violence involved. This was not a common attack. It was an act of uncontrolled fury, rage channeled so intensely that the blows clearly did not stop until the victim was irreversibly dead. The young woman, who would later be identified as Lily James, was still dressed in casual clothes, as if she had just come from a workout or a work session. Nothing in the surrounding scene seemed to indicate a prolonged struggle, which suggested she had been caught off guard. The violence focused on her head indicated that the attacker wanted to ensure she would not survive. The police quickly transformed the area into a crime scene. Yellow tape was placed around the area to isolate the space, and more reinforcements were called in to collect evidence. Forensic agents began examining every detail, from marks on the floor to possible footprints or fingerprints. Everything had to be documented because what was clear was that this murder had not been an impulsive act of random violence. As the investigation team began to work, the question hanging in the air was, who could have committed such an atrocity? What would motivate someone to attack Lily with such brutality? The mystery that had begun with a hesitant call was just starting to unfold, but one thing was already clear. They were dealing with a cruel murderer, and the search for the truth would be long and painful. Now that you know the beginning of this intriguing and disturbing story, I want to know your opinion. What would you do, or what would you think if you received a call like that? Would you be cautious? I want to read your comment, and let's compare responses. Would we all act like Lily? The identification of the victim. The next morning, the crime scene was still shrouded in a heavy atmosphere. The school lights, now turned on, brought a strange sense of normalcy, but for those who knew what had happened, nothing felt normal there anymore. The investigation team had worked all night, collecting evidence and trying to find clues that could clarify what led to the brutal death of that young woman. But there was still one crucial piece missing: the identification of the victim. The detectives began to search the young woman's belongings found at the scene. Among the items near the body, they found a wallet. Inside it, documents revealed the victim's identity: Lily James, 21 years old, water polo coach at the school. With this discovery, the investigation took its first definitive step. Lily was well known at St. Andrew's Cathedral School. Young, charismatic, and dedicated, she was not just another employee. As a water polo coach, she inspired her students, helping them develop both in and out of the pool. Many saw her as a mentor, someone they could rely on. She always exuded contagious energy, full of life, and seemed to have a bright future ahead. When the news of her death began to circulate through the school halls, the shock was immediate. Students, teachers, and staff were incredulous. How could such a brutal tragedy occur within the walls of a place that, for many, was a second home? The school, which had until then been a symbol of prestige and safety, was now marked by an unimaginable tragedy. Lily was not just a coach. She was a young woman still building her life. At just 21 years old, she split her time between working at the school and her university studies. She was passionate about sports and dedicated herself to sharing that love with others, especially her students. The idea that someone so full of life and so loved could meet such a violent end was incomprehensible to everyone who knew her. The school principal, as soon as she learned of Lily's identification, sent an email to the parents of the students in an attempt to handle the situation as best as possible. She informed them that the school would be closed for a few days but did not provide details about what had really happened. However, with the presence of so many police cars and the heavy atmosphere surrounding the institution, it didn't take long for the truth to come out. Students who had been coached by Lily began to express their grief on social media. Messages of sadness, memories of fun times, and the positive impact Lily had made in their lives flooded the school's pages. The general sentiment was one of loss and confusion. Everyone was asking, why? Why would someone do this to Lily? As the news spread, sadness quickly transformed into a search for answers. Who could have committed such cruelty? What could Lily have done to become the target of such a brutal attack? These were the questions echoing not only among the victim's friends and students, but also within the investigation team. Now that Lily's identity had been revealed, the investigation took a more personal turn. The 21-year-old with a promising future had been brutally ripped away from everyone who knew and loved her. The detectives knew they needed to act quickly. Every minute that passed without answers increased the anguish and pressure to find the person responsible for this shocking crime. And so, as the city of Sydney woke up to a new morning, the tragedy of Lily James began to spread, leaving a trail of sadness and a mystery that still needed to be solved. The life of Lily James. Lily James was the kind of person who lit up any room she entered. At 21 years old, she had already earned the respect and admiration of many, not only for her skill as a water polo coach but also for her sweet and engaging nature. She managed to balance her academic and professional life with mastery, always with a smile on her face, as if each challenge was just another opportunity for learning. Lily was born and raised in the suburbs of Sydney, in a family that always supported her in all her passions. From a very young age, she showed a deep love for sports. Water was her natural element. She started with swimming lessons, but it was in water polo that she found her true passion. With a determination that surprised even the most experienced, she excelled at everything she did. She was not just an excellent athlete, but also a young woman with a clear vision of where she wanted to go. In addition to being a talented coach, Lily was a sports student at the University of Technology Sydney. Her goal was to specialize in sports management, to one day perhaps run elite teams or even open her own swimming and water polo academy. Her friends and teachers described her as meticulous and dedicated, always seeking the next step to improve her skills. Lily's routine was intense. She worked almost every day of the week, splitting her time between her university classes and her coaching activities at St. Andrew's Cathedral School. In the afternoons, Lily dedicated hours to training the young athletes who admired her, teaching them not only the techniques of the sport but also the importance of teamwork, discipline, and determination. She was the kind of coach who not only taught but also inspired. Among her students, Lily was much more than a coach. She was a mentor, a confidant. Many young people turned to her for advice, not just about sports but about life. She listened patiently and offered words of encouragement, always with an encouraging smile, as if she knew that no matter how difficult the challenge was, there would always be a way out. Lily was also a swimming instructor for younger children, and her little students adored her. She could turn a simple swim lesson into a moment of pure fun, creating strong bonds with the kids and their parents. It was common to see her playing with the children in the pool, encouraging them to overcome their fears, always with patience and joy. In her personal life, Lily was equally beloved. Her friends described her as loyal, kind, and possessing a sense of humor that made anyone feel at ease. On weekends, whenever she could, Lily enjoyed gathering friends for a barbecue or going for long walks on the beach. She was a young woman who lived life intensely, but in a healthy and balanced way. Nothing in her journey indicated that something so terrible could happen. Nothing. But, as we see in this case, often the signs are all around us, yet we end up ignoring them. Have you ever stopped to think about who is around you? Would you be able to identify dangerous behavior before something worse happens? To help you recognize these subtle signs, I'm leaving a book for you to grab in the pinned comment, How to Identify a Potential Psychopath in Your Daily Life, Signs You Should Never Ignore. Get the book now before it runs out, and protect yourself and those you love. Lily had a structured life, with clear goals and a bright future ahead. She was at the beginning of a career that would surely be very successful. And even with such a busy schedule, she always made it a point to be present for those she loved, whether it was her family, friends, or students. The idea that someone so full of life could meet such a tragic fate was simply inconceivable. Her parents, Jamie and Pet, were devastated. To them, Lily was more than just a daughter. She was the hope for a future filled with accomplishments. Her younger brother, whom Lily had always supported and protected, couldn't believe the loss. That young woman whom everyone knew, who was a symbol of strength and resilience, had been ripped from their lives in a brutal and inexplicable way. Lily's death was not just a personal tragedy for her family and friends, but also for the entire community of St. Andrew's Cathedral School. Her students were heartbroken, and many could not accept the reality that the coach they admired so much would not return. Now, as the police continued their investigation, the community sought to understand how someone so beloved, so promising, so cherished, could have their future stolen in such a cruel manner. The relationship with Paul Tideson. As the investigation progressed, questions about what could have led Lily James to such a brutal end began to accumulate. And it was during this search for answers that one name started to stand out in conversations with co-workers and friends: Paul Tideson. Paul, like Lily, worked at St. Andrew's Cathedral School. He was also a coach, but his specialty was hockey and cricket. At 24 years old, Paul was a promising young man of Dutch descent who had moved to Australia a few years earlier in search of new opportunities. Discreet and focused on his work, he was seen as a dedicated and competent professional. However, unlike Lily, who exuded charisma and vivacity, Paul was more introspective and reserved. A few weeks before her death, Lily and Paul began dating. It wasn't a deep relationship or one with significant commitments, but they were getting to know each other. They went out for dinner, watched movies together, and talked about work at the school. The chemistry between them seemed promising at first, but something changed over time. Lily, who was direct and practical, soon realized that she and Paul were not on the same wavelength. While she saw the relationship as something light and without long-term expectations, Paul seemed more emotionally involved. He wanted something more serious, which Lily, at that point in her life, was not willing to offer. She was focused on her career, on her studies, and felt that the relationship did not fit what she wanted for her future. It was then that Lily made a decision to end the relationship. For her, it was the best thing to do. There was no reason to continue something that wasn't working for either of them. And as always, Lily was clear and honest. She explained to Paul that she didn't see a future for them and that she preferred to move on. At first, Paul seemed to accept the decision. He showed no major reactions, remained calm, and apparently respected Lily's wishes. He continued to work normally, with no one noticing any signs of resentment or hurt. To his co-workers, the breakup was not seen as dramatic, but rather as just another case of two people who tried but realized they weren't going to work out together. But behind the facade of tranquility, something began to change inside Paul. When the police discovered the recent relationship between Lily and Paul, they started putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Although Paul had not shown any violent or disturbing behavior up to that point, the fact that he was the last person Lily had been romantically involved with caught the investigators' attention. In the days following the breakup, Paul maintained an appearance of normality. He continued to coach his students and chat with colleagues as if nothing had happened. However, for someone who was apparently emotionally involved with Lily, his reaction to the end of the relationship seemed too cold. And that indifference began to intrigue the police. Lily's friends, when questioned, mentioned that she didn't show fear of Paul, but she also didn't talk much about him. The relationship, although brief, had not left a significant mark. This suggested that for Lily, the breakup was simply the end of something that wasn't working, but for Paul, it might have meant much more. Was it possible that deep down, Paul was more affected than he let on? Was the end of the relationship the trigger for something much darker? The investigation was now beginning to explore the psyche of Paul Tideson. What was going on in the mind of that seemingly calm and controlled young man? Had he truly accepted the end of the relationship as peacefully as he appeared, or was his calm just a mask for something more dangerous? These were the questions the investigators needed to answer. And as the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, Paul Tideson was being seen not just as an ex-boyfriend but as a potential suspect in a crime that shocked everyone who knew Lily James. The suspect. Paul Tideson was the picture of normality. At 24 years old, he led a life that many would consider exemplary. He was respected by his colleagues and students at St. Andrew's Cathedral School, and in addition to being a dedicated coach, he was pursuing his master's degree in physical education. He had plans, clear goals, and seemed to be on the right path to building a solid career. When Paul's name began to be mentioned in the investigation of Lily James's brutal death, the initial reaction of everyone who knew him was pure disbelief. Paul was a discreet young man. He was not the type of person who stood out in crowds, but there was nothing about him that suggested any dangerous behavior. In the workplace, he was known for his competence and seriousness. He always kept his schedules, was attentive to students, and maintained good relationships with other coaches and teachers. In everyone's eyes, he was someone trustworthy, balanced, and incapable of raising suspicions. No history of violence. No prior incidents. No fights. Nothing. Paul's record was clean. He had never had problems with the police or the law, not even for a traffic violation. This clean slate only reinforced the shock when his name began to come up in conversations about Lily's murder. For his colleagues, the idea that Paul could be involved in something so violent and brutal was impossible to accept. Paul came from a stable family. Born in the Netherlands, he had moved to Australia a few years earlier, seeking new opportunities. He was a young man who always had an organized life, with plans for the future. He was focused on his master's studies, wanted to grow professionally, and everything indicated that he was building a successful trajectory. He didn't have eccentric or explosive behaviors. In fact, his calm personality was something his friends and colleagues admired. However, as the investigation progressed, small nuances in Paul's behavior began to emerge that, at first glance, might have gone unnoticed. The coldness with which he reacted to the end of his relationship with Lily, the way he continued his life normally after the breakup, as if nothing had happened, started to raise questions. The detectives, while investigating his past and daily life, found nothing to suggest that Paul was capable of committing such a horrific crime. But something was out of place. The emotional disconnect he seemed to demonstrate in the weeks following the breakup with Lily was, at the very least, unusual. For someone who was supposedly emotionally involved, his reaction to the breakup did not match the profile of a person handling a romantic disappointment in a healthy way. And it was this coldness, this apparent inability to show emotions, that began to attract the attention of the police. How could someone with such a promising future, with no history of problems, be capable of such brutality? It was hard to believe, and many who knew him continued to be reluctant to accept that Paul could be responsible for Lily James's murder. But as investigators dug deeper, a different image began to form. Perhaps behind this facade of calm and control, there was a side of Paul that no one knew. A side he kept hidden, but that somehow emerged on the night of the tragedy. The contrasts were disturbing. Paul seemed the opposite of what one would expect from a brutal murderer. He was organized, polite, with a stable life, clear goals, and a social circle that respected him. But behind this image lay something dark, something that began to slowly reveal itself as clues about his connection to Lily and the crime surfaced. The question on everyone's mind now was, what could have led Paul Tideson to cross the line of what is morally acceptable and commit such an atrocious crime? What was behind that seemingly perfect young man? The investigation was far from over, but one thing was already certain. Paul, the young man everyone saw as incapable of committing any violent act, was at the center of a mystery that no one expected. And gradually, his past and motivations would begin to be uncovered, revealing what could have transformed a promising young man into a killer. The reason for the meeting. That night, everything seemed routine for Lily James. She had just finished her activities as a coach and was ready to wrap up another workday at St. Andrew's Cathedral School. Her life was full of commitments, but she was used to keeping everything in balance, dividing her time between work and college. What she didn't know, however, was that that day, which started like any other, would end tragically. The previous afternoon, Lily had received a message from Paul Tideson. He seemed calm as always, and the subject of the message was simple. He needed to return some sports equipment he had borrowed. Paul mentioned that he wanted to do this in the school gym, where they both worked, and asked if they could meet that night so he could return the items. The proposal was practical and straightforward. nothing out of the ordinary. Lily, always organized, agreed. For her, it was just another task to be resolved. They had recently ended their relationship, and despite everything, things seemed to have ended civilly. She saw no reason to suspect Paul's intentions. He had reacted well to the breakup, and until that moment, he had not shown any behavior to indicate otherwise. As she prepared for the meeting, Lily could not imagine that that seemingly innocent message was, in fact, a trap. Paul didn't just want to return the sports equipment. There was something much darker behind that request. He was plotting something terrible, and every step Lily took toward the gym brought her closer to a tragic fate. In the gym, the environment was familiar to Lily. She knew every corner of that place, where she spent hours training her students and where she felt safe. She arrived at the agreed time, unsuspecting, and found Paul already waiting. Perhaps they exchanged a few friendly words. Maybe there was a brief conversation about work or the sports equipment he was there to return. Paul maintained his calm, his serene appearance hiding what was really going on in his mind. He handed over the items as promised, but the meeting wasn't about that. While Lily, trusting Paul, prepared to conclude what she believed was a simple appointment, he was already about to put his plan into action. Lily, completely unaware of what was about to happen, had no chance. The gym, which during the day was a place of sports and energy, was now silent, empty, except for the two of them. When Lily turned, perhaps already preparing to leave, Paul followed her. Every step he took toward her was calculated, cold, filled with dark intentions. The sense of security Lily felt in that gym dissipated the moment she realized something was wrong, but it was too late. The brutal attack that followed would shock the entire school community and leave deep scars in the memory of everyone who knew Lily. Paul, the calm and respected young man, had carefully planned everything, exploiting Lily's trust to lure her there, where he would have complete control of the situation. She trusted him enough to believe that the meeting was nothing more than a simple exchange of items, but what Paul had planned was much more terrible. At that moment, the gym transformed into a deadly trap, and what should have been a simple meeting to resolve loose ends became the stage for an indescribable crime. For Lily, that was the last meeting. A meeting she could never have predicted would end so tragically. The school she loved so much, which was part of her routine, was now stained by an act of unimaginable violence, and the truth about Paul's intentions would begin to surface as investigators delved into this dark and disturbing case. As we move toward the end of this shocking story filled with twists and turns, let me know if you followed along so far by leaving your like. Do this if you believe it's important to bring these criminal investigation cases to light. Your support helps ensure that we continue to explore these mysteries and provide more insights on how we can identify warning signs in situations that may seem normal but hide dangers. Every like helps spread this content to more people, and together, we can create more awareness about the hidden dangers that may be around us. The crime. In the almost oppressive silence of the empty gym, what seemed to be a simple return of sports equipment quickly turned into a nightmare. Paul Tyson, who had until then maintained an appearance of calm and control, was now about to reveal his darkest intentions. He followed Lily to the bathroom, an isolated space where no one would hear what was about to happen. Lily, with no reason to suspect, entered the bathroom unaware that Paul was closely following her. What she didn't know was that days earlier, Paul had purchased a hammer, the weapon he chose to execute the plan he had silently devised. The decision to use the hammer was not random. Paul wanted to inflict pain, to ensure that Lily would not survive. When she entered the bathroom, she was caught off guard by the first blow. The impact was brutal, hitting her with such force that it immediately stunned her. Lily, who had spent her life in sports, healthy and full of energy, had no chance to defend herself. The attack was swift and relentless. Paul did not hesitate. With the hammer in hand, he struck blow after blow, with a violence that reflected all the pent-up rage he had accumulated. The blows primarily struck her head, and with each impact, the scene became more horrific. The hammer, a common and seemingly harmless tool in other circumstances, was now the instrument of a monstrous crime. The sound of the strikes echoed off the bathroom walls, but there was no one nearby to hear, no one to stop what was happening. The violence was so intense that Lily's face began to become disfigured. Each blow delivered by Paul had overwhelming force, driven by a mix of frustration, rage, and a desire for control. The brutality was shocking, even by the standards of violent crimes. It wasn't just a murder, it was an explosion of anger concentrated on a young woman who, until recently, believed she was safe. Each hammer blow seemed to reinforce Paul's intention to erase any trace of who Lily had been. Lily did not last long. The injuries were so severe that she quickly lost consciousness. But Paul did not stop. He continued, blow after blow, as if he were overtaken by an uncontrollable fury. The force exerted was sufficient to cause multiple cranial fractures, and the blood loss was rapid and irreversible. Lily's body no longer responded, but Paul continued until he was completely certain she would not survive. When he finally stopped, the bathroom had transformed into a scene of indescribable horror. Lily's blood stained the white-tiled floor, and her body, once full of life, was now unrecognizable. The brutality of the blows had disfigured her face to such an extent that it was hard to believe that just minutes before, she had been a young woman full of dreams and plans for the future. The hammer, the murder weapon, fell from Paul's hands, stained with blood, a silent witness to an act of indescribable violence. The reality of what he had done likely began to settle in his mind. But at that moment, for Lily, it was already too late. Her life had been cruelly and suddenly taken away, without her even having the chance to comprehend why there was so much rage. Paul left the bathroom, leaving behind Lily's body and the weapon he used to commit the crime. The gym, which had so often been a place of joy, now held the dark secret of a night of terror. The scene that investigators would later find would leave everyone in shock, but at that moment, the truth about what had happened was buried in the silence of the bathroom walls. The crime, as brutal as it was unexpected, would mark the lives of everyone who knew Lily, and it would leave investigators with a difficult task of understanding how someone like Paul, with no history of violence, could commit such a cruel act. The answer, however, would not be easy to find, and the pain of losing Lily would echo for a long time among those who loved her. The message and the escape. Shortly after the brutal crime, Paul Tideson, now alone in the gym, was filled with a disturbing calm. The silence that settled around him contrasted sharply with the violence that had just occurred. Lily lay on the bathroom floor, and blood stained the white tiles. But for Paul, the plan was still not fully complete. With chilling coldness, he picked up Lily's phone, which was nearby. His fingers slid across the screen as he tried to compose the perfect message. Paul knew that Lily's body would be discovered soon, but he wanted to buy time. He needed to create a distraction, something that would make people believe that Lily was still alive, at least for a few more hours. It was then that he decided to send a message to Lily's father. It was an unthinkable gesture, but in Paul's mind, it seemed like a strategy to confuse the police and divert attention from the crime for a while. He typed something simple, something any daughter would send on a normal day: "Dad, I'm finishing up here. Can you come pick me up?" The message was short and direct, carefully planned to sound as normal as possible. Lily's father, unaware of anything amiss, read the message and promptly replied, perhaps already preparing to leave and pick his daughter up from school. The message raised no immediate suspicions. It seemed just like another normal day, a text exchange between father and daughter. What he didn't know was that, at that very moment, his daughter was no longer with them. Lily had been murdered just minutes before by someone she trusted. With the message sent, Paul left the gym. He didn't run, didn't show any signs of nervousness. For him, that was the end of his plan. He knew what he had done, and he also knew there was no going back. It was no longer a matter of trying to escape justice. Paul had made another decision. He walked calmly to the parking lot, where his car was. He got in the vehicle and drove leisurely through the streets of Sydney, a city that now carried the weight of his monstrosity. His destination was a well-known place, the Gap, a cliff on the outskirts of Sydney. The Gap is famous for its melancholic beauty and for being the site where many people, over the years, had taken their own lives. The waves crashed fiercely against the rocks, and the cold wind blew strongly, creating a scene that was both majestic and sad. For Paul, that was the place where he would finish what he had started. He parked the car and walked toward the cliff. There was no one around. The sound of the ocean filled the air, muffling any sound of his footsteps. The weight of what he had done felt like a crushing pressure on his chest, but he did not hesitate. He knew that, at that moment, his only way out was to take the final step. Paul approached the edge of the cliff and, without looking back, jumped. Hours later, when the police began to piece together the puzzle of the night, they realized that something was very wrong. The message sent to Lily's father didn't make sense. Lily had never responded to subsequent attempts to contact her, and the body was soon found in the school bathroom. When tracking Paul's phone, authorities arrived at the Gap, where they found his car parked. Paul's body was discovered in the waters below, thrown against the rocks by the impact of the fall. The ocean, relentless, had already begun to take hold of his body, but there was no doubt that he had taken his own life. The investigation, which began with a simple call to the emergency number, ended in tragedy. The death of Lily James was a shock to all who knew her. She was a bright young woman full of promise, ripped from this world by an act of inexplicable cruelty. Paul Tideson, who had been seen as a promising and respected young man, revealed himself to be a man capable of planning and executing a terrible crime, motivated by reasons that may never be fully understood. Now that we have reached the end of this disturbing story, I want to know your opinion. Did this case make you think more about the trust we place in people we hardly know? Please understand the importance of leaving your comment. It's a way for me to know what you think and for you to raise a warning voice to many other girls who may face the same danger. Paul's escape to the Gap marked the end of an investigation but left behind a devastated community, inconsolable friends and family, and unanswered questions. What could have led an apparently ordinary young man to commit such a horrible act? The truth is that, no matter how much justice tries to follow the trail of facts, some secrets die with those who carry them. This story is not just about a crime. It's about betrayed trust, pent-up rage, and the dark depths that sometimes dwell within the human heart. I'm leaving a series of videos here about crimes involving other women, just like what happened to Lily. Each story brings valuable lessons and can help you identify danger signs before it's too late. Follow the upcoming videos and stay alert to these real cases to protect yourself and those you love. Thank you for watching until now. Subscribe to the channel and continue receiving our upcoming content. Until the next video.